was 1935 EC. Two powers controlled the continent. In the east, the sun rose over the autocratic East European Imperial Alliance, otherwise known as the Empire. In the west, a network of loosely allied democracies formed the Atlantic Federation. Both powers depended on a precious mineral ragnite for their survival, and its growing scarcity led to the inevitable war. Hostilities began in the east when the Empire aggressively crossed their western border. The Atlantic Federation responded, and the Second European War was on. The Empire, with its vast military superiority, struck hard, gaining ground in early victories and putting the Federation on the defensive. Emboldened by their progress and momentum, the Empire set their sights beyond the borders of the Federation. In neighboring Gallia, a peaceful principality along the sea, they found their next victim. Gallia had long maintained its neutrality in the tensions between the two superpowers. But the rich stores of ragnite under the Gallian soil proved too tempting for the Empire. It amassed troops along the eastern border and invaded with all the force of an avalanche.
Hello there, welcome to Valkyria Chronicles with Wargame Titan. I've been interested in the Valkyria Chronicles ever since the two tanks related to the Valkyria Chronicles appeared on World of Tanks, which is last summer of 2017. And I remember looking up the game at the time, and you know, it's described as a tactical role-playing game, or based on, you know, tactical wargame type combat, and I thought this sounds really interesting. I have been, I suppose, a fan of tactical combat and turn-based combat ever since my board gaming career back in the 80s in college, when I got into hex war games using chits around games like Russian Front, various other games like that by companies like Avalon Hill and SPI and various other people back in the day. The early PC versions, on the other hand, were pretty unsatisfying. Generally, the AI just wasn't up to the job, and obviously multiplayer wasn't really a thing at the time. So while I would no way claim that my experience of video games, either computer or console games, is in any way comprehensive, anything is quite limited, but I think up till now, XCOM in its various guises was one of the few games that satisfied the itch for a good turn-based tactical wargame. This is described as a tactical role-playing game, but I think it's more of an anime with an embedded tactical wargame. The tactical wargame is pretty good, but you're not really making any role-playing decisions in the actual battles. In my own personal opinion, one of the things that makes a role-playing game, or at least a PC or computer role-playing game, a role-playing game, is the fact that you make decisions for the character. So you're making choices for the character, that the character is meaningful to the character. For that reason, I wouldn't consider the recent Tomb Raider, which is a pretty good story. That's the reboot of Tomb Raider, which has a pretty good story as a role-playing game, because essentially all the decisions are made outside of you as the player. You just decide what order you're exploring stuff in. Okay, there's more than one path probably through the island or through the adventure, but it's not. You're not making choices in the way that a role-playing character would in a role-playing game. Even in an open world PC role-playing game, there's usually moral choices and stuff like that characters make, whereas the character is pretty much predefined in these kind of games. In this game here, I think it's something similar. You're really looking at a visual novel with an embedded tactical combat. Now it's a very compelling, a very engaging story, and I've been sucked into it quite nicely. I'm very happy to play through it, and it's pretty decent tactical combat as well, so that all helps. Now, you start off in this fictional kingdom of Gallia, in this fictional Europe, which is set sort of early 20th century. It's a mix, First World War, Second World War. There doesn't seem to be any aircraft. For that matter, there doesn't seem to be any, what's it called, massive, dank, dark industrial cities either. It all seems to be rather picturesque small towns and villages in a kind of a late or an early modern kind of style, period buildings, lots of windmills, that kind of stuff. But it's very engaging, it's very well told, and the tactical combat game is pretty good. So far I've recorded the entire intro, including the video intro, to the game, pretty much as it is when you start off the game. The one thing to note is the game is presented as a kind of a book, the story on the galley on front. There's a lot of narration, linking scenes together, and then you have a series of video scenes covering main character's story and the main character's character development and how they meet and various things like that. Plus, you usually have some kind of briefing on any of the combats. That again is done in the video. Usually has a kind of a face-to-face briefing from whoever is telling you about what it is you need to do. So Gallia is being invaded because it's got lots of Ragnarite, which is the magic pixie dust of the game. It does everything. It cures, drives the tanks, makes explosives. Everything is done using Ragnarite. That's why all these grenades have blue explosions, because they're based off of Ragnarite technology. So, on the outskirts of Brule, during the initial phases of the Gallian invasion, our various characters meet up and you're introduced to the first tactical combat. You're given a briefing, you're given a fairly good rundown of what you're supposed to do, and the basic thing about the tactical combat is that each person is a unit. Later on, there's vehicles added, there's tanks, so you have different types of troopers. Scouts, shock troopers, lancers, which are essentially an anti-tank, missile unit, snipers, engineers. I think that covers the basics. And later on you're introduced, the main character becomes commander of a squad, and you have up to 20 of these various troopers you can recruit. Any mix that you want, well, you have a limited availability of certain classes. But other than that, you can mix and match up the various troopers that you want, and you fill up the squad, or at least as much of the squad as you want. You never need to fight with the whole squad, and you also need to save fairly often in the chapter mode, because you can't save in combat. Once you're into combat, you're committed to completing the combat or backing out the previous save. As I said, this game was originally developed for the PlayStation 3 and was never ported to the Xbox, but it is ported to the PC. However, the port is minimal. The menus and stuff are original console menus, I think. There's very limited integration of the mouse. So a lot of the menu stuff it's key presses and arrow keys to move your selections around. There may be a divergence, shall we say, in later videos between what I have later on in the game and what the video might show me as recruiting and things like that, because I did a major recruiting drive, filled up my squad, and then the game crashed before I could get a chance to save it, because you couldn't just leave after recruiting the squad. You had to go through all the new things that were shown to you, the new menu options, before the game would allow you to save or open up the main menu and click the save. You seem to have only one save. If you have a save, you overwrite it for the next save, so you can't run multiple saves, or if there's a way of doing it, I haven't spotted how to do it. So now we're into the combat mode, and we have to basically clear off a bunch of Imperial snipers. So I pick Alicia or Welkin, or you've the Brule Militiaman, and once you pick, you spend a command point. Then you're in action mode, and each unit has a certain amount of action points depending on the unit type. Action points allow movement, and when all the action points are spent, you can't move any further. Stuff like crouching, getting up, all of that costs movement, so often you want to move units into cover so that they finish up a move in cover rather than out in the open where they're a lot more vulnerable. The incoming lines represent the fact that the character is under fire from more than one possible attacker. any phasing character gets one target mode phase. Until you actually shoot the target, you can exit out of it by pressing escape, and it will exit out of the targeting mode, so you can move into a better position. Otherwise, if you shoot, you lose the opportunity to target for the rest of that phase. So you got to be careful that you got a proper line of sight, and that you're properly lined up on the target. You can spend command points on the same unit successively, so you can bring a unit up into a position, get them to fire. Usually when you fire, the enemy will fire back. Alicia was quite lucky there to take that enemy scout out with one run attack. Sometimes they survive the attacks. They have a certain amount of hit points, and certain classes of troopers are better armoured than others. Scouts appear to be relatively easy to kill, whereas shock troopers are much tougher and better armoured. So Alicia's standing out in the open, so I don't want the enemy to get a free shot at her in the enemy's phase. Generally, if you're standing around making decisions or thinking about things, and the enemy's close enough to bring them under fire, then they'll remain under fire, so you sometimes want to finish your movement without hesitating too much. I have noticed that happening, that especially once I've engaged the enemy, that they would start shooting back, and they'll keep shooting back every couple of seconds unless I end the round, or in that phase. As I said, you can move a unit successively. You can spend an action point to move the same unit. Again, you've seen me do it there with Alicia, but each time I do it, I reduce the action points that I've got. Basically, the unit gets exhausted and becomes less effective the more times the unit's moved. Some units require more action points than others. Armoured units, tanks, generally require 2 action points compared to a single action point for a trooper. So I've found one of the remaining enemy troopers, but I'm not close enough to the sandbags to get into cover, and I won't engage from here. She's under fire already, so I crouch down, and then we're in cover now, and we get to engage this enemy trooper. So one of the things of being in cover is that you're immune to criticals, I think, and headshots. Whereas he's standing out in the open and he's not immune to those things. That ends my current action, and as I have all my I have 1 action point remaining, so I'm going to use the other action point to bring up Welkin to support Alicia, so that at least there's 2 of them to make defensive fire when the enemies move. Your units get defensive fire when the enemies move as well, so the enemies bringing up units one at a time, and they can take defensive fire from multiple sources if there are multiple defenders in the area. I don't have the command points to get Welkin into cover, but I'm going to have to end him where his current location. He doesn't have a real good shot at the enemy scout, and the enemy scout will probably move closer to them. So the 2 defending units will get shots off, and there's a chance that they will kill the enemy scout before he actually presents a threat. And if not, with 2 of them, they're more likely to survive. Alicia's in cover. Welkin hasn't taken fire already, so he's at full hit points. And we'll see how it goes. So Welkin's taken fire. He'll get the opportunity to fire back. I think he's landed 1 hit there. The scout's on actually pretty low hit points, and the enemy finished their movement phase because I don't think they have any other units to move, and they decided not to use it. So I'm spending explaining there about command points and how to manage command points and the most effective way of doing it. So the enemy have moved, and it's now back to our turn, and we get to act. So I can move Welkin up closer, where I have a much better shot, and Welkin's under cover. Now I switch to targeting mode. I bring the bead on the enemy scout. No, it doesn't take much to shoot him because he hadn't many hit points left. You can see there from his green bar and his units. So that's the operation complete. If you had failed, or if any of the... So you had so many turns completed. If you took longer than that, you'd fail. If one of the major characters died, you'd have failed. The game would be over, and that'd be it. You couldn't go any further. So combats that are important to the storyline, it would often have mandatory characters that have to survive to continue the story. Other than that, then I think characters can die, but it's not that easy. It's possible to rescue characters that are down. Although the rescuing of characters that are down only occurs later on when you've recruited your squad. You can bring another trooper up to the downed squad member, and there will be a medic will come to their attention and help them out, and they will generally survive the combat. The first couple of combats, however, there's no medical assistance. The stuff around Brule has to be done. Well, I think some of them carry healing kits, or the equivalent of healing kits, which will regenerate themselves or others, but you can't bring a person up without the expenditure of a healing kit. So the thing about a healing kit is they have to be already up. If they're already unconscious, the healing kit that's brought by the soldiers is no good. It has to be a medical attention stretchered off the battlefield. Combat yields credits, which are used for research, and experience, which are used to level up your troops. So there's various skill levels for each class of trooper, and generally if you have enough experience to level up a class of troopers, the whole class rises together. So it's all the scouts, or all the lancers, or all the shock troopers, or whatever. Research gets you better weapons, better armor, better gear and equipment, better healing, better grenades, so on and so forth. And it's the only way to upgrade or fix the tank as far as I can see. I think engineers can fix it in the battlefield, but mostly the tank is improved by adding extra modules to it and making modifications to it as the science projects unroll over the course of the game. Well, I for one am really enjoying it so far. I think the storyline is very compelling, it's very interesting, and the characters are well portrayed. It would work quite well, just as I said, as an anime, and I think there is an anime spin-off for it. I haven't tracked down or looked up any information about it to see if I can get my hands on it, though it could be interesting. The tactical combat is actually quite simple, but actually decent tactical game, and reasonably compelling so far. There is a more modern game available on Steam and on the Xbox Game Store, presumably also on the PlayStation. And there is another Xbox game, another side game, again not involved in the characters that are involved here, available on the Xbox. So far I'm enjoying it, and I look forward to playing more of it, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please give it a like if you have not already done so. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll catch you all again soon. Bye for now.